Story 1. I used to work as a forest ranger just beyond the northern U.S. border. One cold day, shortly after noon, my radio buzzed with a missing person report. The details were very little. All I knew was the missing hiker last wore a sweatshirt, hiking shorts, and a glaringly red backpack. It had already been 2 days since he vanished, but the report had just reached my ears. Gathering some essentials, I drove to the area where he was last spotted. An hour in, the thick underbrush and dense canopy convinced me that continuing on foot was my best shot. Before going on the journey, I radioed for backup. It'd be another half hour before assistance arrived, but I was relieved when Officer Dan showed up. Dan was a good man, reliable, someone you'd trust your life with. The trail we chose was infamous for misleading hikers. Its deceptive fork lured many deep into the forest instead of guiding them back to safety. As we trekked, we called out the hiker's name, eyes and ears peeled for any signs of him. The eeriness began when I spotted a makeshift camp just around a bend. "Dan!" I shouted, signaling him to take a closer look. No response. I looked back, and there was no sign of him. A quick attempt on the radio resulted in silence as well. Gulping down a surge of anxiety, I inspected the camp. Recent, but abandoned. The only tracks nearby were those of some wild animal. Time ticked by, 45, maybe 50 minutes. Still, Dan didn't return. My unease grew. There's a code among rangers. We always have each other's backs. Hoping to retrace our steps and find him, I turned back. As I maneuvered past a set of jagged rocks, distant footsteps echoed. Clutching my radio, I tried once more. "Dan, you there?" Silence. But as I progressed, the silhouette of a man with that red backpack materialized. Oddly, his gait was stiff, robotic. As I called out to him, my voice wavered with a mix of relief and rising dread. "Sir, what's your name?" The distance between us was no more than 20 feet. "Sir," I called, but he kept moving forward, his strange gait unfaltering. When he finally halted and whipped around to face me, it was so sudden that I almost tripped backward. "Are you the person we've been searching for?" I asked. But he just met my gaze, offering no reply. Swallowing the growing unease, I tried again. "Are you Phil? Missing person's name?" Still, he remained silent. His unblinking stare began to unsettle me, but I persisted. "Look, if you're the one we've been searching for, let's head back to the trailhead." Throughout the journey, his silence weighed on me, building an atmosphere thick with tension. As we neared the starting point of the trail, relief washed over me upon spotting our vehicles. "All right, I'm going to have you sit in the back of my truck. You aren't under arrest. Just take a moment and relax." Once he was seated, I tried the radio again, desperate for an update on Dan. Unexpectedly, a familiar voice crackled through. "This is Officer Dan. I've located the missing hiker. He suffered a leg injury after tumbling down a ridge. We're heading back to the trailhead now. Apologies for not checking in earlier. Lost signal after taking a wrong turn." Confused, I shot back. "That's impossible, Dan. The missing hiker is with me, in the back of my truck." There was a prolonged silence before Dan's voice, now tense, instructed, "Lock your truck, grab your 12 gauge. Don't take your eyes off him." My hand shook as I loaded the shotgun. I glanced at the truck's back seat through the window, and my heart dropped. It was empty. The cage was mangled, the door ajar. Panic setting in, I circled the truck, but he was nowhere to be found. A dreadful realization began to form when Dan finally arrived with the genuinely injured hiker. Seeing my distraught face, he asked, "You let him go?" "What do you mean, let him go?" I shot back, my voice shaking. He simply shook his head. "We'll discuss it later." But that later never came. We never spoke of that day until once when we were paired up again. As I approached his jeep, I finally mustered the courage to ask about that encounter. But as I did, he looked up with an inscrutable expression, making it clear he had no intention of revisiting that chilling memory. He died 2 years back, and I never got my answer. Story 2. It was my first week as a ranger, responsible for maintaining the natural environment, assisting hikers, and ensuring everyone's safety. It had been a routine job until that chilling night. On my way out of the forest station, a woman approached me, her hair matted with what appeared to be wet sand. She seemed out of place. There wasn't a beach for miles. I instinctively brushed the sand off her hair. She offered a small smile, a hint of embarrassment in her eyes. She started talking about how much she admired the forest, its tranquility, and its beauty. She mentioned an old cabin she had on an island in the middle of the nearby loch and invited me to see it. Though my instincts told me to decline, curiosity got the better of me. I admitted I didn't have a boat to get to the island. She told me about a couple of boats that were often tied at the lakeside, suggesting we could use one of them. Before heading there, I decided to stop by my place to pick up some essentials. Thinking it might be a romantic evening, I went looking for flowers. I remembered a small floral shop in town. On my way there, I met Mr. Collins, an old-timer ranger, who, upon hearing my plans for the evening, gave me a worried look. He warned me about a legend he'd heard during his years as a ranger, tales of an elusive creature in the loch, known for its deceptive appearances. He mentioned previous rangers who'd disappeared, only to be found later with their livers missing. It sounded absurd, but Mr. Collins's serious demeanor made me uneasy. When I finally reached the boat, an uneasy feeling settled over me. The other boat she had mentioned was missing. As I paddled to the island, I remembered stories from my childhood about creatures lurking beneath serene water surfaces. Halfway through my journey, I saw something white shimmering below. Realizing it was just the moon's reflection, I laughed at my own paranoia. But then something moved below, and I caught a fleeting glimpse of eyes reflecting my lamp's light. Panic set in as I recalled the old legends. The tales said that the creature could mimic any form. The fear became paralyzing when I heard her voice, seemingly drowning and calling for help. Was it her, or the creature drawing me into a trap? Reaching the island, I saw the cabin, its lights warm and inviting. I approached with caution. Peeking through a window, I noticed everything inside was aged and covered in layers of dust. There was no sign of her. In the distance, I spotted a stable with a horse. As I approached, I reached out to touch the horse, trying to find some semblance of normality in the situation. To my horror, my hand got stuck to the horse, and the more I struggled, the more trapped I became. The horse began moving towards the water, and I could do nothing but get dragged along. As we approached the loch, I remembered I had a flare gun in my ranger kit. With my free hand, I fumbled for it and shot a flare into the sky, hoping someone might see and come to help. The flare lit up the night, revealing the horse's true form, a hideous, slimy creature with long tentacles. Just as it was about to drag me underwater, another boat sped toward us, the engine's roar startling the creature. It released its grip, and I scrambled onto the boat, gasping for air. It was Mr. Collins. He had seen the flare and rushed to help. We made it back to shore, where I thanked him profusely. He told me that he had lost many fellow rangers to the creature, but he wasn't about to lose another. Days after the incident, I found it hard to shake the feeling off. Every ripple in the water made me jumpy. I requested a transfer to a landlocked forest station, where the only water I'd see would be in bottles. To this day, I often wonder about the woman. Was she real, or just another of the creature's deceptions. All I know for sure is that there's more lurking beneath the water's surface than we can ever truly understand. Story 3. It was one of those evenings when everything felt too still. Some campers, not from around here, had just arrived, and the whole camp seemed off. I sat by the ranger station, staring into the fire pit, letting its warmth and the sound of the crackling wood calm my nerves. My radio buzzed, jarring me out of my moment of peace. The voice on the other end said something about Libby and Dale Morrison. I remembered them. They seemed like the adventurous types. Now their campsite was empty, and they'd been unaccounted for days. With a heavy sigh, I grabbed my gun and climbed into my Jeep. The sun had already begun its descent, casting long shadows over the rugged terrain. The forest's sounds, frogs, crickets, filled the air as I drove. I've always found comfort in these sounds, but tonight they only added to the feeling of unease. This park, with all its beauty, has a way of reminding us of its vastness and its dangers. The old stories would sometimes creep into my mind, stories of folks venturing in and not coming back. I shook my head, trying to clear those thoughts. The focus was on finding the Morrisons. As I journeyed deeper into the woods, the weight of its history pressed on me. The wind howled, seeping through the broken windows of my Jeep. Every turn, every rustle, every shadow heightened my senses. All I hoped was that the Morrisons' story wouldn't end up being one of those tales of the lost. To be honest, even though I've always appreciated the outdoors, camping never really appealed to me. After you've seen enough missing person reports and tragic outcomes, you learn to see the forest differently. Sure, most people camp safely, but sometimes it feels like leaving a bowl of candy out on Halloween and hoping everyone plays by the rules. You can't trust everyone, like how my brother-in-law, Jerry, disappeared just a few weeks back. I mean, these national parks might look pretty, but they have their dark sides. Criminal activities, people going missing, bodies turning up way later, and in such states that you can't even figure out what happened. Too many people come in thinking this ranger job is a walk in the park, until something shakes them to their core. Folk tales have always painted forests as places of mystery and danger. Even with all our tech, our oldest fears still persist. That's why dogs are so invaluable out here. When a dog barks, someone's close, but when they whimper and bolt, you better believe I'm not sticking around to find out why. In my office, there's this board plastered with missing person flyers, smiling faces, families, couples. It's gut-wrenching to think about their last moments in these woods. I wonder if the Morrisons would end up there too. In all my years here, I've only ever removed a handful of those flyers, and not for good reasons. By the time I reached the Morrisons' camp, it was already dark. They set up far from the usual spots. Their gear looked brand new, probably bought just for this trip. I couldn't help but admire their camping spot by the lake. The moonlight on the water was mesmerizing. I've always loved the nights here. There's a beauty to it, as long as you're alert and cautious. People laugh off old legends about the dark, but spend a night out here, and you'll feel that primal fear all over again. Modern tech is cool and all, but lose a flashlight battery or get a dead car, and you're basically back in the old days. My ancestors would have known what to do, but me? I just stood there in the dark, looking around the Morrisons' camp. Everything seemed normal, their fancy camper, their black SUV, all untouched. So why did they leave in such a hurry? Feeling uneasy, I decided to head back to my Jeep. That's when I heard it. A low growl from the woods. Scared the crap out of me. I've never heard anything like that before. It didn't sound like any animal I knew. So, I bolted to the Jeep, Just as I was trying to calm down, there's this figure in the road. It's Jerry, my brother-in-law. He looked like a mess. Jerry quickly told me about some creature in the woods and a crazy group of people who seemed to worship it. They'd taken him, but he managed to escape using that pocket knife I gave him last Christmas. We just drove, trying to get as far away as possible. Every now and then, I'd glance at him, glad he was safe, but worried about what came next. As I turned a corner, a group of people blocked our way. They were all in black, wearing those cheap party masks. The vibe was wrong, really wrong. Before we could react, something from the forest attacked them. People in the road were sent flying, some left bleeding, and others just gone. Whatever they had planned for us, something out there wasn't having it. I floored the gas pedal, desperate to put distance between us and whatever that was. We raced to the ranger station. Outside, I saw a couple who matched the Morrisons' description. The woman introduced herself as Libby Morrison, a paranormal investigator. They were researching the strange events in the area. Looks like they found it. The aftermath was grim. 10 of those masked folks were found dead, and the others were taken into custody. And as for me, I handed in my ranger badge. No more nights in the woods. From then on, my outdoor job involved selling camping gear, far away from the mysteries of that park. Story 4. A few years back, I was stationed at a secluded forest ranger post, deep in the heart of Montana. The solitude was both a blessing and a curse. The vast open spaces and untouched beauty were breathtaking, but the silence of the dense woods often felt haunting. One foggy morning, while on my usual route, I stumbled upon an old, worn ladder fixed to a massive boulder. I remembered climbing it once before, just for the view, but today was different. There was a man, standing motionless, back to the ladder, eyes fixed on me. His presence there was unsettling. As I approached, trying to communicate, he seemed not to hear me. Growing impatient, I raised my voice, signaling that I needed to use the ladder. Without uttering a word, he slowly descended. But that wasn't the end of our strange interaction. Like a shadow, he seemed to follow me, past the small restrooms, down narrow trails, and even to the far end of the parking lot where I'd parked my truck. Panic welled inside me as I hurried to my truck, but before I could even lock it, the man was already inside, taking a seat in the back. My heart raced. "Hey!" I shouted. "You can't be here! Get out!" To my surprise, he did, but his sunken eyes bore into me, and he lingered near my vehicle, hands deep in his pockets. I drove away as fast as possible, glancing at the rearview mirror to make sure he wasn't following. His figure disappeared into the thick fog, and my pulse began to return to normal. I've never been more thankful for the safety of my truck. The next morning, I decided to dig a little deeper into who this man might be. Cross-referencing recent reports with the description of my stalker, I was horrified to discover he matched the profile of a serial killer who had evaded authorities for years, preying on lone travelers in secluded forests. Determined not to be his next victim, I prepared myself. I acquired some security measures, including setting up tripwires around my usual patrol areas. For days, I felt like prey being hunted, constantly looking over my shoulder, always on high alert. But luckily he was caught before he could show up again. Story 5. The forest was quiet, with only our footsteps breaking the silence. As the sun began setting, we came across an old house, hidden by the trees. It looked really old and abandoned. "Let's take a look," Kate said, curiosity lighting up her eyes. I wasn't keen, but I didn't want to let her go in alone. Inside, The place smelled moldy and stale. The weak sunlight showed a room full of old furniture covered in dust. We moved around cautiously, and then Kate noticed stairs. "Let's see what's up there," she whispered. Something about the place made me uneasy, but I didn't say anything. The top floor led to a single dimly lit room. As our eyes adjusted, we noticed an old woman sitting by the window, her face hidden in shadows. The chilling feeling grew stronger. "Kate," I whispered, tugging her arm. "We should leave." "Hello," Kate ventured. The woman turned her gaze slowly toward us. At first, she seemed kindly, almost inviting. "Lost your way?" she asked in a soft voice. "We were just exploring," I explained, trying to ease the sudden tension in the room. The woman smiled, a slow curl of her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, you're in luck. Not many find this place," she said, her voice dripping with a strange mix of glee and sadness. As we looked around, the old house seemed to come alive. The wind whistled through the gaps in the windows, causing the worn-out curtains to flutter, creating fleeting shadows on the walls. The wooden floorboards creaked even when we stood still, and the air grew colder, making us shiver. "Do you live here alone?" Kate asked, trying to make small talk. The woman nodded, her gaze drifting to an old, faded photograph on a dusty table beside her. "Once it was full of life. Now it's just me." Kate and I exchanged glances. We didn't want to be rude, but we had to leave. As we began making our way toward the door, there was an echoing cry from upstairs, like the soft wail of a child. The woman's head snapped up, her gaze sharp. "You heard her too?" she asked, a wild look in her eyes. "We should go," I whispered to Kate. But as we tried to move, the woman stood, her frail appearance suddenly replaced with an imposing presence. "It's not safe out there," she said, blocking our path. "We really must be heading back," Kate replied, her voice trembling. The old woman's gaze was unrelenting. "Stay," she insisted, her voice no longer soft but demanding. Every time we tried to maneuver around her, she'd be right there, blocking our way, her face inches from ours. We whispered amongst ourselves, trying to figure out an escape plan. Kate, with her quick thinking, suggested she would distract the woman while I searched for another way out. I wasn't comfortable leaving Kate alone with her, but time was running out. I nodded, and our plan was set into motion. "Ma'am, could you please show us that photograph? It looks lovely from here," Kate said, feigning interest. The woman, hesitating for a moment, seemed to soften, her eyes drifting back to the picture. "All right," she murmured, walking towards it. Seizing the moment, I darted towards the back of the house. I stumbled upon a kitchen and noticed a window, too small to climb out of but big enough to see outside. There was a narrow path leading to the dense woods. If we could just get out, we could lose ourselves in the trees and find our way home. As I was about to head back to Kate, a cold hand gripped my shoulder. I spun around to see a young girl dressed in old, tattered clothing. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice filled with sadness. "She won't let you go," I stammered, trying to find my voice. "Who are you?" She looked away, pointing to the picture the old woman had shown Kate. "I used to live here, long ago, but now I'm trapped, just like you will be." Panic surged. I raced back to the living room to find Kate arguing with the woman, who was becoming increasingly agitated. "We need to leave," Kate shouted. Suddenly, the house rumbled and the front door slammed shut, the echoing sound jarring in the silence that followed. The old woman started to chant in a language I couldn't understand. The atmosphere grew dense, and the temperature dropped. We had to act fast. In a desperate bid, Kate hurled the dusty photograph at the old woman, momentarily startling her. Using this distraction, we rushed her, pushing past and making a beeline for the back door. We sprinted down the narrow path I'd spotted, hearing the cries of the old woman and the haunting wails of the trapped spirit echoing behind us. Breathing heavily, we finally reached the edge of the woods and didn't stop until we saw the familiar paths of our neighborhood. Days later, after recounting our terrifying experience to a local historian, we learned the truth. The old woman was once a caretaker of children, but after a tragic event where a child under her care passed away, she was consumed by grief and turned to dark rituals to bring the child back. It was said that she trapped the souls of those who ventured into her home, forever reliving her tragic past. Despite our miraculous escape, the weight of our discovery looms heavy. The house still stands, hidden and waiting for its next victim. Story 6. Northern Ireland has always been a land of myths and legends. Growing up, I heard tales of old spirits and fairy forts. Most of us laughed these tales off, attributing them to old folklore. I had been working as a park ranger in the Mourne Mountains for nearly 4 years, a job I took up with the British National Trust, ensuring the protection of heritage sites and natural beauty spots. It was a serene job for the most part, filled with picturesque landscapes and quiet trails. That serenity was shattered one cold autumn morning. I got a call from a clearly shaken camper. He'd found the remains of several sheep near his campsite. The way he described it over the phone sent chills down my spine. "It's as if the ground swallowed them up and spat them back out," he said. The Mourne Mountains, while peaceful by day, could seem haunting by dusk. Legends spoke of the children of the Mournes, an ancient sect that once dwelt in these hills, known to interact with the fairy realm. They were believed to punish those who disrespected the land. Such tales were shared as fun campfire stories and nothing more, but today they felt eerily relevant. Guided by the camper's directions, I found myself near the Spelga Reservoir. The setting sun cast long shadows that played tricks on the eyes, making the trees seem like lurking figures. The silence was heavy, interrupted only by the wind rustling the leaves. The campsite was more gruesome than described. Not one or two, but remains of 4 sheep, spread out in an unnaturally perfect circle. At the center of this grotesque circle was an old Celtic symbol carved into the ground. The very sight of it made the hair on my neck stand up. It was a protection symbol, one often found at ancient sites meant to ward off dark spirits. I called for backup, and soon my colleague, Maeve, joined me. She knew the tales of the region better than anyone. Seeing the circle, her face went pale. "This is no random act," she whispered. "It's a message from the children of the Mournes." Further investigation led us to a nearby farmer who confirmed his sheep had been disappearing, but they vanished sporadically over 2 weeks, not overnight. There were no tracks, no signs of struggle, just the eerie circle and the protective symbol. The incident soon spread through the town. Locals shared hushed conversations, many recalling old tales their grandparents told them of the children and the consequences of angering them. Although a wildlife expert's report suggested it might be the work of a large predator, those who saw the sight knew better. No animal could create that deliberate symbol. Over the next few weeks, other strange occurrences plagued the mountains, haunting melodies heard on the wind, shadows moving in the periphery, and chilling cold spots in random areas. Despite the increasing unease, official reports dismissed the events as local superstitions and heightened fox activity. However, among the rangers and locals, there was a silent agreement. Some things were best left unexplained. Now, when I patrol the trails of the Mournes, there's an unsettling feeling that never quite leaves me. A sense of being watched, of not being alone. It's as if the mountains themselves are alive, holding secrets that date back centuries. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I can almost hear whispers reminding me of the ancient lore and the mysterious guardians of these hills. Story 7. I had been working as a park ranger for a few years when they offered me a night shift as a fire lookout. The forest, with its dense canopy and miles of wilderness, was at a constant risk of wildfires. My job was to keep an eye out for any smoke or signs of fire. One morning, when I walked into the station, Tom, the usual night shift lookout, was in a heated argument with the chief. "I can't do it anymore. Someone or something's out there, every night," he practically shouted. "Tom, calm down. It's probably just some kids messing around," the chief replied, trying to pacify him. "Find someone else. I'm done," Tom muttered, pushing past me on his way out. As he left, he stopped briefly, looked me in the eye and said, "Be careful out there, kid." I always respected Tom. He was nearly 53 and had been on the job long before I joined. The chief explained the situation and asked if I'd take over the night shift. I agreed, thinking Tom had just let the isolation get to him. The first few hours of the shift were uneventful, but around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like footsteps below. Thinking it was just a deer, I ignored it until I glanced down and noticed a man standing there. Concerned that he was a lost camper, I descended the tower to help. He asked about the nearest campsite, and I pointed him in the right direction. After ensuring he was good, I headed back up. About half an hour later, the footsteps returned, this time louder. Glancing down, it was the same man, but something felt off. He seemed unresponsive. I decided to confront him. As I approached, he turned around, and my heart nearly stopped. His face, it wasn't there. Just smooth skin stretched over where features should have been. He emitted a low, distorted, muffled cry. Panic took over, and I sprinted back up to the tower, every step echoing the rapid beat of my heart. The next few moments were a blur. I heard the deliberate thumping of his feet on the stairs. It felt as if he was mocking me, drawing out the fear. I fumbled to get my radio, and as I did, a reflection in the window caught my eye. The faceless man, standing right outside. A chilling realization washed over me. It was his reflection in the window. I wasn't seeing him outside. He was in the room with me. Heart pounding, I slowly turned around, but there was nothing. The room was empty. Only the low hum of the radio and my heavy breathing filled the air. The night dragged on, and dawn couldn't come fast enough. When relief finally arrived, I shared my ordeal. Of course, they chalked it up to exhaustion or my imagination. It's been weeks since then. I haven't experienced anything similar, and the forest has returned to its quiet, serene self. But the night's events have stuck with me. Even now, as I recall the incident, the eeriness of that faceless man sends shivers down my spine. Tom's words often play back in my mind, a haunting reminder that the forest hides secrets that some of us might never understand. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.